Hi, welcome to our channel of IGNOU audiobooks, Indira Gandhi National Open University, School of Vocational Education and Training, SOVET, Master's Degree Programs, Master of Arts, Entrepreneurship, MER, Semester I, MER002 Fundamentals of Entrepreneurship, Block-1 Overview of Entrepreneurship, Unit-1 Entrepreneurship-Concept and Theories, 1.0 Introduction. The concept of entrepreneur would be traced from its very formative stages of understanding to that of present day. The discussion on theories on entrepreneurship would take into account psychological traits as well as sociological conditions which make it either conducive to entrepreneurship or function as deterrents. The entrepreneur is an outcome of certain cultural and social factors that shape the psychological make-up of the person. He is motivated for higher achievement with an immense capacity to bear risks. 1.1 Objectives. In this unit we shall make an attempt to understand the fundamental aspects of entrepreneur as well as entrepreneurship. Our purpose has been to enable the student to know who is an entrepreneur, familiarize with the different theories on entrepreneurship, assess the factors responsible for creation of entrepreneurs and hurdles in making of a good entrepreneur, and to understand the meaning of innovation and adaptation in entrepreneurship. 1.2 Concept of entrepreneur. 1.2.1 Genesis of the word entrepreneur. Entrepreneur as a word was in use in the French language long before its emergence as a functional concept. In the early 16th century, it referred to those who were involved in military expeditions. In the 17th century, it was extended to cover those engaged in construction fortification. Only towards the beginning of the 18th century one finds it being applied to economic activities. Perhaps the essential connotation of its evolving application has been adventurism of some kind or the other. In the 18th century, Richard Cantillon, an Irishman living in France, emphasized the unique non-insurable risk-bearing function of the entrepreneur. He used the term entrepreneur for all those who buy factor services at certain prices with a view to sell their product at uncertain prices in the future. Though not clearly spelt out, he distinguished between the owner and the entrepreneur. He stressed the risk involved in carrying on the production and exchange of goods which the entrepreneur was supposed to undertake, like facing the consequence of bankruptcy in situations of depression. After a few decades, an aristocratic industrialist, Jean-Baptiste Say, who had an unpleasant experience, was probably the first person to distinguish between the function of the entrepreneur and that of the capitalist. Taking into consideration the element of risk involved, he broadened the term. According to him, coordination, organization, and supervision were also essentially entrepreneurial functions. He regarded the entrepreneur as the most important agent of production who provides continuing management and brings together factors of production. Along with judgment, perseverance, and knowledge of the world and that of business, Say insists that the entrepreneur must possess the art of superintendence and administration. 1.2.2 Non-recognition of the entrepreneur. Though in France, Cantillon and Say emphasized and delineated the function of the entrepreneur, the English economists belonging to this school did not contribute in any appreciable manner towards the conceptual and theoretical formulation on entrepreneurship. Adam Smith considered that the sole motive of the capitalist employer was just to accumulate wealth by providing capital for use by his worker. Little difference was perceived between the terms profit and interest as they were used interchangeably. Savings was identified with investment by implying that the profit led to the motive for saving. On the whole, for Adam Smith, the fundamental economic determinant of growth was the rate of capital formation. Smith did not bother to either analyze or emphasize factors like risk-bearing and coordination that was involved in any business. He did not distinguish the function of the entrepreneurs from that of the capitalists when he referred to three different orders of people: those who live by rent, those who live by wages, and those who live by profits. Ricardo also emphasized the significant role of the rate of capital accumulation in the theory of economic development. He pointed out that the two main factors which govern the rate of capital accumulation were the ability to save and the will to save. While the former depended upon the amount of surplus, the net income, of the economy, the latter depended on the rate of profit. According to him, both profit and wages affected each other, presuming other things to be constant. The Ricardian system differed from that of Smith as it considered the economy not to be strictly dependent on the rate of investments for its expansion or decay. By manipulating the socio-cultural variables and the needful technological improvements, the developed state of the economy could be maintained. John S. Mill, in his restatement of the classical theory, attempted to separate the entrepreneurial function from that of providing capital. This attempt was shattered by Alfred Marshall, who reaffirmed the Smith-Ricardian tradition by treating profit as a single undifferentiated income flow. But Marshall distinguished between the capitalist and the undertaker management. He said, the undertakers who do not follow the beaten track increase their earnings by adopting new and improved methods of doing business, which is later initiated by his competitors, reducing the profits. This bore the seeds of the idea of innovation, which was not yet fully developed. Maybe it was an anticipation of Schumpeter's theory of innovation and economic development. 1.2.3 Recognition of the entrepreneur. In this subsection, we will consider the definitions of the entrepreneur by different theorists. The importance of the entrepreneur was gradually recognized by later theorists. Leon Walras, in his theory of general equilibrium, considered entrepreneur as the fourth factor of production who hires and coordinates the other three: land, labor, and capital. The entrepreneur is on one hand the buyer of the productive services and on the other seller of produced goods. Under free competition, the entrepreneur is responsible for ensuring the market to move towards a general equilibrium. He ventures into the areas of production which are profitable, increase the output, thus reducing the profit. He leaves the spheres of production which are incurring losses, thus checking the output and consequently losses. With more and more formalization of modern economic theory, there had been a tendency to relegate entrepreneurship to catch all residual factors. These residual factors include entrepreneurship along with technology, education, institutional organization, etc. Though the function of the entrepreneur was gradually recognized and emphasized as a factor in production and exchange of goods by some quarters, it was in a very static sense. The dynamic notion of entrepreneurship, i.e., entrepreneurship as a force in itself for the expansion of the economy, was not in vogue till Schumpeter put forth his theory of innovation and economic development. That is why his work is considered to be a path-breaker to the growing tendency of relegating entrepreneurship to a mere factor in production. Schumpeter attributes to the entrepreneur the unique quality of innovation that a mere capitalist lacks. His creative response to an economic situation is responsible for further expansion of economic activities. He clearly distinguished the managerial activities of a business leader from his creative response. In other words, the entrepreneur need not necessarily be the person who invests the money, need not be the person who manages the day-to-day routine work, but she could be the person who brings about the necessary changes by introducing the innovative elements that leads to the expansion of the business. Entrepreneurship, thus, is not a profession or a permanent occupation. An entrepreneur may arise from any economic base. Thus, entrepreneurs do not by themselves constitute a class. According to Schumpeter, innovation is not the same as invention, maybe because of any one or more or the following are the introduction of a new product, 2. Adoption of a new technology, 3. Opening up of a new market, 4. Finding out a new source of supply, and bringing about a new organization of an industry, Schumpeter's theory of economic development is based on his experiences during the period of the Industrial Revolution prior to the coming of the giant corporations. Such a theory is not appropriate for the less developed capitalist countries with a few large firms dominating the manufacturing business. It is doubtful whether in an underdeveloped region the innovation to which Schumpeter attaches so much importance is practicable or is enough to give the required boost to the economy from its state of stagnation or decay. 1.2.4 Entrepreneur as critical to economic development, H. Cole, G. H. Evans, T.C. Cochran. Among others who followed Schumpeter in emphasizing the critical role played by the entrepreneur in economic development are A. H. Cole, G. H. Evans and T. C. Cochran. According to Cole, entrepreneurship is an integrated sequence of actions taken by an individual or by a group operating for individual business units in a world characterized by a large degree of uncertainty. Evans sees entrepreneurs as persons who initiate, organize and control the affairs of business units that combine factors of production to supply goods and services, whether business pertains to industry, trade, or profession. Cochran feels, students of entrepreneurship generally have come to agree that while it is a definable function, entrepreneur is a term denoting an ideal type, rather than a term continuously applicable to a real person. Any business or other official may exercise entrepreneurship, but a classification cannot be devised that would empirically separate entrepreneurs and non-entrepreneurs. 1.2.5 Entrepreneur Organization. Frederick Harbison. Fast-changing technology in the contemporary world has led to increasing complexity of business organizations. In such a situation, the entrepreneur as an individual has little significance. Frederick Harbison finds it appropriate to consider the entrepreneur as an organization which comprises all the people required to perform the entrepreneurial function. These functions are the following: are undertaking or managing of risk and the handling of economic uncertainty, 2. Planning and innovation, 3. Coordination, administration and control, and 4. Routine supervision. In a small enterprise, all the functions may be performed by an individual, but in large establishments, the functions have to be delegated among a group of persons embodying a complex hierarchy. Harbison suggests that it is sensible to label the group of persons performing the entrepreneur's function as an organization rather than as the entrepreneur. The term organization, apart from connoting the constellation of functions, persons, and abilities used in management of the enterprise, also highlights the nature of integrating these into a common undertaking. The advantage of having this concept of organization is that it can be subjected to quantitative measurements, enabling us to have the notions like investment in organization in the same sense as investment in machinery or equipment and accumulation of managerial resources, a concept similar to capital accumulation. It is useful to use this concept of organization in the case of large joint stock exchanges. The role of the entrepreneur is also acknowledged by Maurice Daub. According to him, the entrepreneurial function is the coordination, controlling, or the integrating force that is required in any society with modern machine techniques and extensive division of labor. The function is to make adjustments, innovations, and the ability to make correct judgment about the future. 1.2.6 Emphasis on microeconomic models. William J. Baumol and Harvey Liebenstein. Going by current theoretical literature in economic theory, the role of the entrepreneur seems to have disappeared. William J. Baumol considers that the microeconomic models are such powerful tools for the analysis of well-defined problems where the variables are so well-defined that there is very little left for the entrepreneur for solution. He is of the opinion that a person of extraordinary vision is no longer required. Harvey Liebenstein agrees with such a view but points out that the role of the entrepreneur is actually trivial in the prevalent models of the contemporary economic theory, primarily because they are static models assuming complete certainty. He writes, If all inputs are marketed and their prices are known, and if there is a definite production function and relates inputs to outputs in a determinate way, then we can always predict the profit for any activity that transforms inputs into outputs. If net profits are positive, then this should serve as a signal for entry into this market. The problem of marshalling resources and turning them into outputs appears to be a trivial activity. From this point of view, it is hard to see why there should ever be deficiency of entrepreneurship. The answer is that the standard competitive model hides the vital function of the entrepreneurs. Liebenian acknowledges entrepreneurship as of two types. One is the Schumpeterian, innovative type, and the other is routine management of ongoing business. An entrepreneur, according to Liebenian, may be an individual or a group of individuals having mainly the following four characteristics: 1. Gap filling, 2. Connecting different markets, 3. Input completing, 4. Creation and expansion of markets. He further says that there is no one-to-one correspondence between the sets of inputs and outputs. Gap filling is a vital function that is required to be performed for production to take place and for the product to reach its consumers. The whole array of roles perceiving of the economic opportunity, marshalling of financial resources and technical know-how, organizing people to produce and then to market it, has to be performed by the entrepreneur. By input completing, he means that certain minimum quantity of inputs needs to be marshaled for any given economic activity. If less than the minimum is available, then it is for the entrepreneur to come forward and arrange for what is lacking. The demand for entrepreneurs depends on the potential opportunities for the gap fillers and input completers. It also depends on the extent to which gap filling and input completing can increase production. The supply of the entrepreneurs depends on the availability of persons with gap filling and input completing and the prevalent social, political and motivational factor that influence the extent to which individuals or groups utilize these capacities. 1.2.7 Considering entrepreneurs as passive. H.J. Habakkuk, Phyllis Dean and Douglas North, it is observed that the empiricists and historians, in comparison to the theorists, give a central place to entrepreneurship in the economic theory of development. There are often who deliberately or out of omission ignore the role played by the entrepreneur in the process of economic development. Persons like H.J. Habakkuk, Phyllis Dean, and Douglas North have considered the entrepreneur to play a very passive part, being drawn into the industrial scene by the major determinants like invention, changing factor prices and new market opportunities. According to Kilby, most of the economic historians avoid the rigor of either of these extremes in preference to a more realistic, if overdetermined, multi-causal model embracing economic, sociological and historical determinants. What actually is the task to be performed by the entrepreneur? Kilby quite cogently put it as the array of all possible entrepreneurial roles encompass the perception of economic opportunity, technical and organizational innovations, gaining command over scarce resources, taking responsibility for the internal management and for the external advancement of the firm in all its aspects. He adds to this that in any particular time and place the skilled performance of certain of these tasks by the entrepreneur is critical, while other tasks demand little attention or can be safely delegated to subordinates. Thus, different settings may call for markedly dissimilar entrepreneurial personalities. After having recognized the importance of entrepreneurial function in economic development, the immediate questions that one is likely to ask are: who are capable of performing the function, that is to say, who can become an entrepreneur, where do they come from or where can one look for them, whether they are in abundance or in dearth? Though these may appear to be separate questions, they are actually related. The answers to these questions will be found during the course of this study. 1.3 Theories on entrepreneurship. In the last subsection, we considered who are the entrepreneurs, the factors contributing to entrepreneurship as defined by different theorists. Theories put forth by various authors attempting to explain the mechanism of the supply of entrepreneurship largely falls into the spheres of the two disciplines, viz., psychology and sociology, though it would perhaps be futile to separate them completely into either of these disciplines. In this subsection, let us analyze the views of theorists on entrepreneurship. 1.3.1 Max Weber and Schumpeter. To begin with, let us consider Max Weber's and Schumpeter's theoretical constructs, which are simpler than the others. Peter Kilby points out that there is much similarity between Weber's and Schumpeter's theories, though they do differ in certain aspects. In both theorists, the energized entrepreneur appears in the traditional economy and sets in motion a revolutionary process of creative destruction. The common and the key element in the theories of Max Weber and Joseph Schumpeter is innovation. The innovation of Weber's entrepreneur is an outcome of thoroughgoing rationalizing of every aspect of his enterprise, whereas Schumpeter's notion of innovation is more creative in the sense that the entrepreneur's creativity is not merely limited to systematic ordering of means to an end. As mentioned previously, he may bring about a fundamental change in technology, or may create new demands, or find a new source of supply of raw materials, or adopt new organizational skills. Schumpeter's theory stands out from that of Weber's and others in its showing little regard for the social, cultural, and religious variables which they emphasize for the analysis of the supply of entrepreneurs. Weber builds up his theory on Protestant ethic, which is religious fervor of rationalizing mundane activities, eventually leading to the growth of capitalistic order. Schumpeter just considers that the economic leaders are individuals motivated by an atavistic will to power, who occur randomly in any ethnically homogeneous population. Their special characteristics are an institutional capacity to see things in a way which afterwards proves correct, energy of will and mind to overcome fixed habits of thought, and the capacity to understand social opposition. 1.3. David McClelland. David McClelland, in explaining rapid economic growth, emphasizes on the internal factors, the human values and motives that lead man to exploit opportunities, to take advantage of favorable trade conditions, or in short, to shape his own destiny. His book Achieving Society is more of an empirical work wherein he also attempts to articulate a theory of entrepreneurship based on the notion of innovation and risk-bearing capacities of his predecessors. He highlights the fact that groups respond to similar conditions differently. To explain this, he introduced his psychological concept called need for achievement or an achievement, by which he means a desire to do well, not so much for the social recognition or prestige but for the sake of an inner feeling of personal accomplishment. The difference in response to similar conditions by groups is because the groups differ in their level of an achievement. He tries to prove that in a society when there is a concentration of people with a high need for achievement, it eventually leads to rapid economic growth. The link between high-end achievement and economic development is the entrepreneurial behavior. He summarizes that entrepreneurial behavior is exhibited by people who are high in N, achievement, NI, their desire to take personal responsibility for decisions, 2, their preference for decisions involving a moderate degree of risk, and 3, their interest in concrete knowledge of the results of decisions. To be more precise, his statement, N, achievement fits people for entrepreneurial jobs, particularly those jobs which give concrete knowledge of results, clearly links an achievement with entrepreneurship. According to Peter Kilby, David McClelland has extended the causal sequence of entrepreneurial behavior put forth by Weber as follows. Look at the screen. The levels of an achievement among groups depend on the way they have been reared in their childhood. Inculcation of high an achievement motive, according to McClelland, is due to a child-rearing practice which assures maternal warmth, self-reliance, training, and less of authoritarianism. In his later career, he has been less rigid on his emphasis on child-rearing practices as he talks of arousal of achievement motive among the adults through proper courses and discourses, making way for the policy makers for a programmed economic development within a short time. 1.3.3 Robert Lewine looks at it the other way round. According to him, socialization of children will be regulated by the type of status mobility system that prevails in that society. Where higher status is attained through outstanding performance in one's occupational role, parents will try to foster in their children initiative, industriousness, and foresight through self-reliance and achievement training. In order to exemplify, he distinguishes the Igbo society in Nigeria from hierarchical society like Kansa, where upward mobility is attained through loyalty, obedience, and sycophancy. Here the parents subject their children to training instructions in the use of flattery and the suppression of tendencies that might antagonize superiors. Thus Lewine shifts the emphasis from prevalent values to the social structure as the cause of achievement motive. 1.3.4 Hagen stressed on the prime importance of creative personality for the change from traditional society to a society with modern industrial economy. He distinguishes between the creative personality and the uncreative personality elaborately. He associates the unrealistic personality with the traditional society as it appears to explain a great deal about its complexities, which is otherwise not possible. He is of the view that all societies once upon a time were traditional and continue to remain so because of the traditional authoritarian child-rearing practices leading to uncreative personalities. Some societies have changed into ones with modern economies, and others have remained to be traditional. These creative personalities, in order to restore their status position, long being the cause of anxiety of the group, channelize their energies mainly to activities from which the elites keep away. In the traditional societies, the elites keep away from the economic activities, considering them to be mundane. So it is easier for these creative personalities to get engaged with economic activities and eventually become economically powerful and consequently gain other powers and change the system to that of modern economy. Thus, in his theory, the making of creative personality is most important to bring about growth and economic expansion in societies so long traditional. Hagen's sequence of change from uncreative personality of stable traditional society to creative entrepreneurial type is as follows. Look at the screen. Hagen's sequence of change from uncreative personality of stable trade society to creative entrepreneurial personality of economically developed societies. According to Hagen, 4 types of events results in status withdrawal: A. Displacement by force, B. Denigration of value symbols, C. Inconsistency of status symbols with A. Changing distribution of economic power, and D. Non-acceptance of expected status on migration to a new society. With the occurrence of status withdrawal, the process of entrepreneurial personality formation sets in accordance with the above sequence of change. While Hagen and McClellan both consider creative personality as the source of entrepreneurship, they differ in the causal sequence, with Hagen introducing the concept of status withdrawal. 1.3.5 Thomas C. Cochrane. Cochrane rejects the random, spontaneous, arbitrary notion of entrepreneurship. He considers entrepreneurship to represent a model personality which is a consequence of prevalent cultural values, role expectations, and social sanctions. Values like high achievement, cooperativeness, team spirit, rationality, etc. are inculcated by the modern child-rearing practices. Apart from the value structure, the entrepreneur's personality is shaped by role expectations of the defining groups and the requirements of the new operational needs. In comparing the United States of America and Latin American countries, he stresses the creative entrepreneurial response or abortive attempts. This depends primarily on the prevalent cultural values, 1.3.6 Frank W. Young. The theory offered by Frank Young is more sociological in nature and very much akin to the theoretical constructs of Durkheim and Levi-Strauss. Though he gives due importance to biographical studies of eminent individuals in business and industry, in the study of history of entrepreneurship he considers entrepreneurship basically as a group-level phenomenon. Like Cochrane and others, he is of the opinion that psychogenic studies of entrepreneurship do not reveal much beyond the superficial. According to him, when a group or subgroup is highly differentiated and is lowly positioned, it tends to react to the situation by showing a higher degree of solidarity. This solidarity of the group is manifested in its cautious efforts to improve its symbolic position. The differentiation essentially is the diversity of the social meanings maintained by the group. A group with higher degree of institutional and occupational diversity and less communication eventually leads to a redefinition of a situation. In order to elevate their symbolic position within the larger structure, they always find out ways and means for mutual understanding and reciprocation despite the differences in the occupational and family status. At this time, it may pick up any rhetoric, be it religious or political, to rationalize and form an ideology or maintain the degree of solidarity of the group. When it concentrated on the economic fronts to improve its position, there is consequently a spurt of entrepreneurial activity in its conventional sense. The entrepreneurial activity need not necessarily be limited to the economic sphere. The sphere on which the group concentrates would depend on that, which would incur minimum threat from the dominant group or groups, at least initially, but would improve its position. According to Young, the concept of solidarity can replace that of entrepreneurship and can be broadened to the national level or reduced to an individual with many in between. In decreasing sizes, forming a series with scope for a chain reaction to occur. Young, like his predecessors, essentially adopts a similar notion of entrepreneur as the innovator. The difference is in the causal sequence where the transformation codes are considered an outcome of group-level activity of the solidarity group to improve its symbolic position in the larger structure. The individual level of entrepreneurship is actually a partial manifestation of the group level of entrepreneurship. The conspicuous entrepreneur may appear to be operating single-handedly, though actually he is aided by a group-level activity. Family background, experiences as belonging to a particular kind of group and reflections of general cultural values together are responsible for generating entrepreneurial activity. In the above analysis, psychological reactions, though part of sociological explanation, are not treated as independent causal factors. Besides, the unnecessary sequences of changes necessitated by the psychological theorists are avoided. 113.7 John H. Kunkel. Kunkel's theory on entrepreneurship is based on the behavioristic model of Skinner and Homans. He writes, according to the behavioral model, the determinants of an individual's activities are to be found largely in the conditioning procedures, both deliberate and accidental, to which he has been subjected in the past, and in the sets of reinforcing and discriminative stimuli which have become part of his behavioral chains and are part of the present social context. The relationship between the social environment and the individual is reciprocal. The social context of an individual creates particular secondary deprivations, a particular reinforcement, one specific schedule, and the associated controlling stimuli, which are the essential elements of the operant conditioning process. An individual manipulates the social context with his behavior. Deprivations are reduced or noxious stimuli are eliminated or avoided, and new SDs for further activities may thereby be established. Chaining. These events together with the procedures result in the formation of the personality, considered as the locality of behavior patterns in the individual's repertoire, which he has acquired as a consequence of his often unique experience and as a member of several groups and of his society. Personality then does not determine behavior, but is behavior, with personality itself being considered as behavior. The necessity to postulate terms like attitude, values, or need in order to explain or predict behavior also ceases. Kunkel is of the opinion that these concepts are useful to the extent they only describe behavior. He makes it clear that by undermining the necessity of these concepts to explain behavior, the behavioral approach does not deny the existence of man's internal state or depreciate the human spirit. These concepts are not made use of primarily to avoid the ambiguities they bring in along with them. Following the behaviorists, he goes on to say that there is no need to alter the values of men in order to bring about change in their activities. What is required is to change only certain elements of the operant conditioning context of which all men at all times are an integral part. Further, he adds that the psychological prerequisites of economic development are certain behavior patterns, whereas the social prerequisites are the determinants of the reinforcing and discriminative stimuli by means of which desired patterns are shaped and maintained. According to Kunkel, in order to establish the psychological and social prerequisites of economic development, especially in the underdeveloped countries, it is pointless trying to change the values, attitudes, or personalities of its people, as has often been advocated in recent years. On the other hand, he propounds that the behavioral approach, emphasizing the shaping of behavior by means of differential reinforcement and punishment, opens a way not only to testable explanation and prediction of behavior, but also to its alternation. The behavior model of man leads to the conclusion that, if behavior is to be changed, changes must first occur in the reinforcing stimuli, in their presentation and schedule, and in the discriminative stimuli. This can be accomplished only through the alteration of those aspects of the social context which influence these components of the conditioning process. Changes in character, rather than being the prerequisite of economic development, are to be considered as concomitants and consequences, insofar as economic development means, for the average individual, changed reinforcers, changed schedules, and new behavior patterns, newly reinforced
under new circumstances. The problem of economic development, then, is not the alteration of character of certain elements of it, but the change of those selected aspects of a man's social environment which are relevant to the learning of new behavior. Kunkel goes on to add that the recent emphasis on the role of the individual in economic development does not actually undermine efficiency of the structural approach to economic development. Rather, the importance of the structural approach is duly recognized as it is essentially a part of the behavioral model of the man in that a person's activities at any moment are not only the consequences of a long conditioning history, but are also influenced by the immediately surrounding social context which maintains or alters the probabilities of behavior pattern established in the past and is largely responsible for the shaping of new patterns. This by taking into consideration the effects of behavior of both the past and the present social context, the behavioral model reconciles the individualistic and structural approaches to economic development. Kunkel also points out that efficacy of the behavioral approach to economic development based on the principle of operant conditioning depends on to what extent the government has control over the relevant aspect of the social environment which act as reinforcers. The greater the difficulty of shaping new behavior patterns, the longer it will take and the greater the chance of failure. The behavioral model of man then not only becomes a tool to bring about alternation of behavior but also enables one to understand the reason for resistance to change. Kunkel's theory does not lead to pessimistic conclusions as drawn by many studies. dealing with the psychological prerequisites for rapid industrialization. Since the behavioral model of man takes into consideration the influence of the present social structure apart from that of the past to determine the individual role, there is the possibility of changing the relevant aspects in the present social structure to alter the individual behavior conducive to economic development. Unlike many others, Kunkel affirms that there is no need to wait for a number of generations for the creation of new values and personalities to bring about a certain enterprise for economic development. Thus, there is no foundation on theoretical grounds for the pessimistic outlook concerning the capacity of underdeveloped countries to industrialize in a short period of time, since usually only a few aspects of the societal environment can be altered. Present efforts to create behavior prerequisites must begin on a small scale. This is no easy task, but it is a possible one. 1. For nature and characteristics of entrepreneurship. Instead of listing of personality traits, it is worthwhile to recognize the orientation to action that is implicit in the concept of entrepreneurship. In order to identify the characteristics of successful entrepreneurs, what an entrepreneur does is important, not the personality traits that he may or may not possess. So in this section we shall discuss primarily with those attitudes and behavior that are shared to varying degrees by successful entrepreneurs. Apart from few obviously necessary characteristics, such as energy level and basic intelligence, no one set of attitudes and behaviors is necessary for each and every successful entrepreneurs. The following is highlighted by Thomas W. Zimmerett and Norman M. Scarborough in their book Entrepreneurship and New Venture Formation. Prentice Hall, New Jersey, 1996. Is prevalent among of successful entrepreneurs. I. Commitment and determination for an entrepreneur to be successful. These attitudes are very important. Especially in cases of new ventures, the entrepreneur has to completely immerse herself or himself in the enterprise. Without this total commitment, the entrepreneur might end up spoiling all the effort just for small errors that could have been avoided had he been adequately careful. The undiluted determination of successful entrepreneurs is candid by the sincerity with which they perform their task. 2. Desire for responsibility. The entrepreneurs have a keen desire to have access and control of resources that they would productively utilize engage to achieve their self-determined goals. They prefer to bear the responsibility of the outcome of the venture they are associated with. This willingness to accept the responsibility for the outcome of the entrepreneurial venture is closely related to the deep desire of entrepreneurs to maintain an internal locus of control. 3. Opportunity obsession. An entrepreneur is on the lookout for opportunities that enables one to fix a goal that one can achieve. Even periods of crisis would be an opportune moment to realize some goals. Out of chaos, the entrepreneur recognizes and picks up an opportunity and eventually proves himself successful. The successful entrepreneur is also very adept at determining the difference between an idea and an opportunity, being constantly on the lookout for those ideas that do, indeed, present opportunities. 4. Tolerance for risk, ambiguity and uncertainty. Entrepreneurs do not gamble. They avoid taking unnecessary risks. They essentially are risk Managers who only take calculated risks. High rates of changes, risks and ambiguity are accepted as normal in their world. Uncertainty is something that is treated as a given condition. One has to live with it. In such a world, it is important that the entrepreneurs learn to manage risk and make sure that the risks taken are reasonable ones, commensurate with the perceived rewards. Entrepreneurs learn to manage risk, in part by transferring part of the risk of the venture to others, investors, bankers, customers, suppliers, and so forth. Entrepreneurs display tremendous capacity to tolerate ambiguity and uncertainty. They are quite used to conflict. They view conflict as a means to an end in examining risk, uncertainties, and potential rewards. Successful entrepreneurs capitalize on the constructive effects of stress and minimize the negative reactions of exhaustion and frustration. Self-confidence. Entrepreneurs are generally optimistic. They have great faith in their ability to take initiative and eventually succeed in a venture. They are quite confident to perform the needful as they firmly believe that things are well within their control and they are capable of accomplishing the task. Their level of self-confidence is pretty high. The preponderance of research also indicates that effective entrepreneurs actively seek and take initiative, evidenced by their constant willingness to assume personal responsibility for the success or failure of the operation. 6. Creativity and flexibility. Entrepreneurs are often faced with changing demands of their customers and their business. They can by no means afford to be rigid. They have to be flexible enough to live up to the expectations that keep changing. The ability to respond to in a flexible manner to constant change requires a high degree of creativity. Very often ambiguity will serve better than certainty. A creative entrepreneurial mind is required to deal with this ambiguity in the development of problem solution. 7. Desire for immediate feedback. Entrepreneurs get to know what they are doing. There has to be constant feedback of the consequences of their actions so that they take realistic measures to achieve their goals. They have a strong desire to use this knowledge to improve their performance. This characteristic is also very relevant to their desire to learn from mistakes. Consequently, such entrepreneurs are often described as excellent listeners and quick learners. 8. High level of energy. Entrepreneurs are extremely energetic. They are so much immersed in their venture that long hours of work become a routine for them. During the launch of an enterprise, the extra energy that an entrepreneur puts in become a critical factor for its success. 9. Motivation to excel. Entrepreneurs like to excel in whatever they do. Most often they are self-starters and have an inner desire to keep doing better than their previous performance. We have seen David McClelland developing his thesis based on this need for achievement. The drive is from within. They are seldom driven by externally evidenced status and power. Rather, they derive satisfaction from the challenge of being creative and building their chosen venture. They appear to have a keen sense of their strengths and weaknesses. Smiley orientation to the future. The entrepreneurs do not sit idle even when everything seems to be going fine with them. They are constantly either on the lookout for new opportunities or are trying to improve upon their set standards. They have to be very much proactive to live up to the need of the hour. Entrepreneurs engaged in high growth ventures, having more stakes, are consequently more concerned for the future. 11. Willingness to learn from failure. An entrepreneur is not scared of failure. As he may have tried to set up a venture and may have failed, but the failure would, more likely, make him further determined to taste success. It is important in studying entrepreneurship to distinguish failure of a business from failure of the entrepreneur. They are not the same. Failure of a particular business is not necessarily a loss, although the specific business no longer exists. The resources, in the macro sense, are most often redistributed. Furthermore, and most important, people learn from business failure. The only thing more painful than learning from experience is not learning from experience. 12. Leadership ability. Normally, entrepreneurs have some experience related to the enterprise they are associated with. They have intimate knowledge about the resources required, the technology, and the market. It is rare, indeed, for a highly successful venture to be started by someone with no experience in the chosen field of the venture. Successful entrepreneurs have an ability to extend influence without power. This tactic requires that the entrepreneur be more of a mediator or negotiator than a dictator. With so much of knowledge and experience, they tend to be visionary leaders, not dreamers. It has been said that the difference between a visionary and a dreamer is that when a dreamer wakes up, there is nothing there. Such visionary leaders are not loners, they have no need to insist on getting all the credit. Rather, they realize that rarely is it possible to build a successful venture alone. 1.5 Entrepreneurship, Innovation and Adaptations. Both the role and the motivation of the entrepreneurs have varied with time in the evolution of the developed economies. Similarly, as has been mentioned earlier, Schumpeter-like innovative entrepreneurs are not the requirements of the developing countries, primarily because there is already a vast stock of proven technological innovations which are yet to be applied in these countries. Moreover, the kind of original innovations which are taking place in the advanced countries at present are very difficult to be achieved in these countries because of their lack of adequate infrastructure, resources, highly skilled personnel, and effective management organizations. It will be rather too ambitious for the entrepreneurs of the developing economies to prove to be innovative at par with those of the developed economies. The task of the entrepreneurs in the developing economies is essentially the adapting of the already existing proven innovations to these economies. The task is not to carry on original technological innovations like those of the 19th century entrepreneurs of Europe and America, who are their actual counterparts, taking into consideration the stages of industrialization of the then Europe and America and the present state of the developing countries. Apparently, it may seem to be a simpler task than that of the 19th century entrepreneurs of the Industrial Revolution. Hurdles faced on the production side and in marketing the products make task of the entrepreneur of the developing countries more difficult than that of their counterparts in the West. Problems that arise on the production side are largely due to the very existence of a huge stock of proven technology. The entrepreneur of a developing country finds large gap between the techniques of the existing semi-traditional means of production and the modern technology. The leap that one has to make to upgrade the technology to keep pace with the advanced countries is quite big, because for the latter things improved comparatively slowly. It is not merely the disparity of technology which poses the problem. Along with it, the requirement of technical and managerial skills of highly improved quality is of utmost importance. All this has to be done in a far shorter interval of time. In the open or virtually open economy, the severe competition which these entrepreneurs have to face both in terms of price as well as quality from the already established firms having vast resources and specialized personnel is something which was never experienced by their predecessors. The cheap transport by sea has destroyed the natural protection of these countries. Trade barriers, wherever these still exist, have been of little help. Many of the producers in advanced countries have made inroads into the domestic markets as multinationals in one form or the other by investing in their local subsidiaries. Peter Kilby sums up the nature of the entrepreneur's function in the developing economies much more precisely. He says, the backbone of unapplied production techniques and of the non-existence of large, well-mapped-out import markets mean that perceiving truly new economic opportunities and the carrying out of fundamental pioneering innovations of the type envisaged by Schumpeter are largely irrelevant. On the other hand, the operational problems of matching advanced technology with qualitatively ill-fitting local factors of production are considerably greater than in the 19th century. To obtain adequate financing, to adopt techniques and organization to maximize factor productivities and minimize unit cost, to improvise substitutes for non-available skills and materials, these tasks on the production side will more often than not represent the critical entrepreneurial function in the modernizing economy of the 20th century. While it is difficult to disagree with Peter Kilby on his views regarding the kind of entrepreneurship he prescribes for the developing economies, it is worth noting the views of Peter Drucker on innovation and entrepreneurship in general. According to Drucker, innovation is the specific tool of entrepreneurs, the means by which they exploit change as an opportunity for a different business or different service. It is capable of being learned, capable of being practiced. Entrepreneurs need to search purposefully for the sources of innovation, the changes and their symptoms that indicate opportunities for successful innovation, and they need to know and apply the principles of successful innovation. It shows first where and how the entrepreneur searches for innovative opportunities. It then discusses the do's and don'ts of developing an innovative idea into a viable business or service. Part 11, the practice of entrepreneurship, focuses on the institution. That is the carrier of innovation. It deals with entrepreneurial management in three areas: the existing business, the public service institution, and the new venture. What are the policies and practices that enable an institution, whether business or public service, to be a successful entrepreneur? How does one organize and staff for entrepreneurship? What are the obstacles, the impediments, the traps, the common mistakes? The section concludes with discussion of individual entrepreneurs, their roles and their decisions. Finally, part 3, entrepreneurial strategies, talks of bringing an innovation successfully to market. The test of an innovation, after all, lies not in its novelty, its scientific content, or its cleverness. It lies in its success in the marketplace. He refers to America at present as a truly entrepreneurial economy, though in due course others are likely to become entrepreneurial as well. He says, it is still too early to say whether the entrepreneurial economy will remain primarily American phenomenon or whether it will emerge in other industrially developed countries. In Japan, there is good reason to believe that it is emerging, albeit in its own Japanese form. But whether the same shift to an entrepreneurial economy will occur in Western Europe, no one can yet say. Demographically, Western Europe lags some 10 to 15 years behind America. Both the baby boom and the baby bust came later in Europe than in the United States. Equally, the shift to much longer years of schooling started in Western Europe some 10 years later than in the United States or in Japan, and in Great Britain it has barely started yet. If, as is quite likely, demographics have been a factor in the emergence of the entrepreneurial economy in the United States, we could well see a similar development in Europe by 1990 or 1995. But this is speculation. So far, the entrepreneurial economy is purely an American phenomenon. Drucker goes on to stress that innovation and entrepreneurship should not be limited to the economy only. He recommends that its domain be stretched to the entire society. Innovation and entrepreneurship are thus needed in society as much as in the economy, in public service institutions as much as in businesses. It is precisely because innovation and entrepreneurship are not root and branch, but one step at a time, a produce here, a policy there, a public service yonder, because they are tentative and will disappear if they do not produce the expected and needed results, because, in other words, they are pragmatic rather than dogmatic and modest rather than grandiose. They promise to keep any society, economy, industry, public service, or business flexible and self-renewing. They achieve what Jefferson hoped to achieve through revolution in every generation, and they do so without bloodshed, civil war, or concentration camps, without economic catastrophe, but with purpose, with direction, and under control. Thus, this requires of executives in all institutions that they make innovation and entrepreneurship a normal, ongoing, everyday activity, a practice in their own work and in that of their organization. Drucker's notions of innovation are the ideal that an entrepreneur or an entrepreneurial society must constantly try to achieve to be in the forefront, and it is not limited to the sphere of economy only. The need of the above warrants its application in the society in general to affect human life for the better. 1.6 Summary. In this unit, we studied the development of entrepreneur and entrepreneurship, the theories and views concerning the definition of entrepreneur, his role and functions. Also, we considered how different eminent theorists understood the concept of entrepreneurial behavior and role played by different factors. Towards the conclusion, we looked critically whether the theories of the Western thinkers would apply to the unique conditions of the developing, non-industrialized world, and what hurdles have been experienced while applying the theories to the conditions in the developing countries. Finally, we need to note that entrepreneurship is not limited to the sphere of economy only. Thank you. Subscribe to our channel for more updates, and we will see you with the next chapter.